Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a quick guide on our new squad mod, which is essentially bringing back occupation for those of you that don't know from a long time ago, maybe a year or so plus. But we've splintered it off into its own mod. It's called Dynamic Direction, and we're going to be going through today talking about what it is, how to play it, and just the basic rundowns, because I know there's a lot to take in, and when you're joining the server you have no idea what's going on, and I want to kind of break down all the changes and just go over all the information and how to basically give you a layout for how to play this, because I know it's very overwhelming. So first and foremost, this is the Steam page. I'll have links to all the links in the description down below, but this is basically where you're going to be subscribing to the mod on Steam. I highly recommend you do it via Steam and not through the in-game browser, just because it can mess up the version that you're downloading. So just make sure that when you download it, you're going to Steam mod page and not doing it in-game. But basically, once you're subscribed, here's the rundown of Dynamic Direction. It's basically, the direction of the mod is to make things as open and as sandboxy as possible, to pretty much take the handcuffs that normal squad puts on you and give you the freedom to make the tactical decisions and different choices that you want to make throughout the match. And there's a couple ways that we do that, and we'll go into it soon. But here in the Steam page, you'll see a couple of links as well as in the description of this video. So the main one we're going to go to here is the detailed mod overview, which is going to bring you here. Now, this goes into depth on all the changes that we've made, so let's go through top to bottom. The first main thing is the game mode itself. So Dynamic Direction is primarily focused around the occupation game mode. Now, the idea behind this game mode is kind of interesting, okay, because it mixes in a couple of different game modes altogether. The first big thing you're going to notice in occupation is this huge purple circle, which is essentially like a king of the hill circle. It is where you are supposed to be during the match. It is the AO. If you're not within this AO, you can actually start bleeding tickets. The team that holds a larger lead of 6 or more players will begin bleeding the other team. So that's the first mechanic that makes this kind of king of the hill-ish. The mentality behind having a large AO or a large objective area is that you now have the freedom to maneuver anywhere within this circle. Whereas compared to AAS or Invasion in Vanilla Squad, if you weren't on the objective proper, you were a detriment to your team because you were not actively participating in the capturing of the objective, which was winning or losing the game. So being able to blow up this circle and make it very, very large. On some maps, it's 2 clicks in diameter. Any terrain feature here that you see fit that is good for a tactical position or will give your team a positional advantage is relevant. Whereas previously in AS or Invasion, if you took the high ground but it wasn't in the point, you could lose the objective and therefore just get steamrolled. But now every single piece of terrain within this circle is relevant to the firefight, so you never feel like you're not actively participating in the objective. Okay, so that's the first thing, and why this AO is so large and why there's a single one of them. And that ticket bleed is the main mechanic of both Mercy as well as determining who controls or owns the AO, right? If you are controlling this AO, you should technically or theoretically be out killing the enemy team, which means that you should be applying bleed, which means that your team should gain the advantage on the macro scale. The next thing that we have changed in addition to this AO, which is the biggest thing, is how factions play. This takes a little bit of influence from Insurgency game mode, right? Especially when it comes to conventional versus irregular. But let's talk about the factions. There are 2 types of factions within our game mode. That is conventional, which are your armies, and your irregular forces, which is militia and insurgent. So anything that is an army, that's Russia, US, Britain, and MEA, and CAF, all those are conventional forces. And anything that comes after that, we add any other factions, whether it's, the Australians that are coming soon or the Marines, those will be conventional. The irregular forces will always be ragtag, guerrilla fighters. And that's how we split the 2 factions. So the main thinking behind this was we wanted to create asymmetrical warfare and to make insurgents and militia really truly feel different and fight differently, just to give you that extra depth both thematically and dynamically as far as how the gameplay was in the game. But let's talk about conventional forces first. So big tweak here is conventional forces are limited to 2 FOBs in the AO or on the map at any point in time. It's a maximum of 2. The cool thing about conventional force FOBs is that their FOBs actually generate tickets within the AO. They're also very expensive. They cost 75 tickets. And the main reasoning behind these changes is because we wanted the FOBs to feel like actual forward operating bases, as the name implies. I honestly hate how FOBs are used within Vanilla Squad, mainly because when they're used within Vanilla Squad, it's just sit the FOB in a bush, have the team spawn it, and attack from there. And like super FOBs are completely irrelevant now because artillery just wipes them off the map, and like building up FOBs is pretty much useless. In almost every game mode, you want to put down, the meta is to put down as many FOBs as possible in all these different bushes for multiple attack vectors. And in my brain, that's just not how a conventional force should fight or how FOBs should feel. Like, and that's subjective, right? But that's just my take on FOBs. This is our take on FOBs, which is when you put the FOB down, it is your forward operating base. It is a base to build. It is a base to defend. And there's a couple mechanics that go into how we reinforce this. The first one is the closer that the conventional force FOB is to the center of the objective. So let's say if this is the large AO, right? And you have main for one team over here and main for one team over here. You have the inner 20% and the outer 20%. And then you have the in-between 60, right? So this is 60%. This is 20%. And this is another 20% within the circle, okay? I know this isn't proportionally right. I'm sorry, I'm not an artist. But this is essentially the outer ring or the purple ring of the AO. And then you have the outer, the inner, and the middle, okay? On the outer 20%, conventional force FOBs will gain 5 tickets per 15 minutes, okay? On the inner 60%, which is the chunk or the majority of the circle, conventional FOBs will gain 15 tickets per 15 minutes. So it's a ticket a minute. But on the inner 20%, conventional FOBs will gain 25 tickets per 15 minutes. So there's an incentive to push your FOB as close as possible to the center, okay? And it's done in the 3 stages. The outer, because we really don't want to see this thing where you put the FOB on the outskirts. Like, this is still viable because it's close to your main, it's safe here, right? And it's hard to attack because the flanks are technically outside of the bubble. But you're not entirely punished for it. You're just disincentivized because it's only 5 tickets per minute. But if you get it within the meteor chunk of the inner 60, you're gaining 1 ticket per minute, which in most games can make a huge difference. And if you manage to push it all the way in the center, which is a very dangerous place to put it, right, that inner 20%, you're rewarded greatly with 25 tickets per minute. Now, a reminder that conventional FOBs, there can only be 2 of them. You can't place 3. However, this does not mean you have to place 2. Because just because you have the ability to does not necessarily mean you should. And placing that second FOB down is a huge boon because let's say you get 2 FOBs in the center. That's now 30 tickets per 15 minutes. That's 2 tickets a minute that you're gaining. But now you have to defend these, okay? And the reason why it's important to defend these FOBs is because these FOBs cost 75 tickets if they go down, okay? So to put this into perspective, if you put a FOB in the center, you better be able to defend this FOB in the center for at least 45 minutes in order to break even, okay? So the first thing when going through your mind is, where can I put the FOB that is in a safe position? And is there a closer place to the center of the circle that I can place it that is also safe? All right, so you want to get it safely as close to the center as possible. But the priority is it being safe, because losing these tickets losing these FOBs at 75 tickets is devastating. Now, another feature in vanilla, quote unquote feature in vanilla that I detest is the fact that FOBs can just be wiped off the map. Or they can be soloed down by a lone radio guy. Like the whole name forward operating base just does not lend itself to that kind of gameplay in my mind, right? This is once again my perspective on how, you know, I want squad to play and how we've changed it to play that way. But these bases should be bases. So you only lose these 75 ticket FOBs if you truly deserve to lose them. And the way we've done that is, number 1, they cannot be dug up quickly by a solo player because we've increased the health on the FOBs. So it takes a long time to shovel them down. So there should be no instance where, oh no, one guy just randomly ended up shoveling down the FOB and no one paid attention, because it does take time to shovel these down, which means you should only be able to remove them after you have cleared and controlled the FOB. Okay? The second thing we've done is we made them invulnerable to explosive damage. Okay? Because we want FOBs to be taken by, we overrun it and we truly do control it. no cheese on it, like dropping a C4 charge on it or artillerying like it off the map or hitting it with an SU-25 strike or bringing a warrior up and shooting the radio and haha, your entire base is gone now. You should only lose the FOB if you truly deserve to lose the FOB, okay? Now, we don't want people hiding FOBs, right? We go back to how I've hate how in vanilla squad, people will stick FOBs in buildings and bushes and just like, we're going to drop the FOB, we're going to drop the HAB, we're going to drop an ammo crate, and that's it. We're going to move now. FOBs now have a very large radio, if this is the FOB, attached to them, okay? And this radio sticks up pretty high. So hiding the radio is no longer a meta, okay? So this thing cannot be placed in buildings anymore, and it must be placed outside. So there's a visual indication of where the FOB is and where you need to be attacking. And just a reminder, it's okay for it to be placed outside because it cannot get cheesed. You cannot solo dig this crap up by yourself because it should, it has a ton of health. Like you would need multiple people digging for a little bit. In addition to that, it cannot be C4 charged, it cannot be exploded off the map, and it cannot be shot by cannons to get rid of, okay? So this thing literally stays until you truly have overrun the FOB. In addition to that, FOBs will reveal themselves after 15 minutes. So let's say you place a FOB down here. After 15 minutes, a large circle that looks kind of like this will pop up, and the FOB will be anywhere within this large red circle, which gives the other team a direction to attack. We've done this for two reasons, okay? In addition to this, this is because it's on a 15-minute timer, you'll get your first tick. So your first tick should be technically free. But the reason behind having this, what we call an obfuscation circle up, is because it gives more structure to like, where should we go? Where do we attack? Because sometimes people won't be able to find FOBs. And the second is like, it further incentivizes you to defend it because after a certain amount of time, it will pop up on the map. There are no such thing as sneaky conventional FOBs in our game mode, okay? These forward operating bases should be treated like forward operating bases. Okay, so moving on, we've talked about the ticket, we've talked about how they are taken down, we've talked about their placement. Let's move on to irregular FOB mechanics, okay? So irregular FOBs function differently, going back to how we want insurgents and militia to fight differently than conventional forces. For example, they get 4 FOBs, so that's twice as many FOBs as conventional, and are only damaged by C4 or IEDs or incendiary grenades, taking a lot of influence from insurgency. So what we've essentially done is taken this insurgency and applied kind of our small twist to it, okay? The same AO mechanics apply in irregular factions, okay? So this means that if we, let me remake this. If we have the circle here, and we have conventional forces here, and irregular forces here, there's a couple ways that this plays differently. In normal conventional versus conventional, you will start at the same time. But conventional versus irregular, these guys will start on the map before you, because we're considering them quote-unquote native to the region, okay? So this means that insurgents will start, and militia will start earlier than conventional, which will allow them to set up their areas within the circle, as well as potentially cut off or attempt to cut off conventional from reaching the circle. And that provides an interesting early, mid, and late game kind of dynamic, which we'll get into later. But the way that insurgents play differently is not only do they get to start earlier, but they get 4 FOBs, right? So they get 4 FOBs, and for every FOB that they place within the circle, so right here we have 4 FOBs in the circle, they drain 10 tickets from insurgent or from conventional per 15 minutes. So that means that if insurgents get 4 of their FOBs up, all 4 of their FOBs up, that's 40 tickets per 15 minutes. Now, the reason why we've done this is because it's kind of, it's extremely thematic when you think about it, right? Because conventional forces need to push into the circle and quote unquote invade, right? Because they're going to hit roadblocks, they're going to hit ambushes while trying to come into the circle. But once they get into the circle, they need to establish a position and defend it. And once they've established and, created this position to fight from, they need to leave their FOB and conduct patrols in order to eliminate these enemy caches located around the map. And the cool thing about how insurgent and militia FOBs are done is that these FOBs don't lose 75 tickets. Insurgent and militia FOBs, or regular force FOBs, only lose 25. I think it's 25 or 10. I'll have to check the numbers. We're still balancing it a little bit. But it's drastically lower than conventional, which means that technically, insurgent forces don't need to be babysitting these FOBs, like not as hard as conventional forces. So it creates an interesting dynamic where the gameplay within CF versus IRF is that IRF is constantly setting up ambushes either from main to the FOB, from main to the caches, from the caches to the FOBs, like trying to ambush here, while also potentially having the ability to counterattack and try to destroy the enemy FOB. So as you can see, there's a lot of options here. And this is probably the main thing about our mod that is really confusing, is the fact that the game modes are slightly complex, but because of their complexity, you have a lot of options. Rather, AAS is just attack, always attack the objective, always defend the objective, or invasion is always attack the one point. There are multiple strategies that can be performed within this dynamic. For example, if I am the CF force, I might want to try to get 2 central FOBs up that are mutually supported and just play defensively while gaining 30 tickets per 15 minutes and maybe take out a cache or 2, right? But even if I get 2 FOBs up for 30 tickets every 15 minutes, I'm still losing a net 10 because there are 4 up. So I'm still going to have to leave the FOB and hunt for these caches and continually hunt for them as they're placed down. So you can see we've done a lot here to give players as much agency and freedom as possible to play this whole AO as they like. Because CF gets to choose where they want to play, and Irregular forces get to choose where they want to put their minus 10 FOBs at. So we're letting the players pick where they want to put the objectives. The only thing we don't let players pick is where this purple circle is. But this purple circle is randomized every time the map is loaded. So you should get a different experience almost every time you play a different map. So now that we've talked about Irregular forces and how that kind of changes up that dynamic, is where conventional versus conventional feels like a mirror matchup. Conventional versus Irregular should be dirty tricks, ambushes, drawing the enemy out, and counterattacks. You're going to get a different feel from both. The main thing I will say is, like, it's going to change how you think how to play this game. Because if you are mindless about it and you don't think about how do I flank, how do I take this objective, and I just run at the enemy, because it is a sandbox, that is allowed. Like that there's nothing that disincentivizes that, and you can get caught in a meat grinder. But that's just gonna happen with a sandbox. It's like every strategy, there are so many strategies viable, but you have to think about how you execute them. And if your strategy is to mindlessly run at the enemy, you will just end up mindlessly running at the enemy. So this game mode forces you to think. It forces you to be, work with your team, because you need to be able to get around the map. You need to organize with the platoon. You need to figure out who's attacking and defending. But you have so much to play with. You have so much. You have like a 2-click diameter circle to play with. You have multiple objectives that are randomized because the players decide where to put them down. You have multiple strategies depending on how your platoon wants to play. Like if you want to do double defensive FOBs, you can. If you want to do single defensive and flank the enemy FOB with vehicles, you can. There's so much you can do here, and it's all within this circle, and you don't feel rushed. That's the one thing we want to make sure, was that you never felt rushed. Because in AAS and Invasion, you always felt like it was go, 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 go. We have to get to the next cap now. Just give up, spawn on the next FOB. And it felt kind of metagamey, but also just like you didn't have time to breathe and experience moments in the game that were that could be exploited or were natural to the game, like convoys on Fallujah or ambushes, right? It's very rare that you actually ambush things in squad unless you catch your lone Logi doing a run, because the game is all about the flags and the cap zones. Everything else is essentially irrelevant. But because of the large circle, we've tried to make as many objectives as equally relevant as possible to give you multiple win conditions. And having multiple win conditions, we think, is important to keeping things as sandboxy as possible and giving power to the players. Okay, but let's talk about gameplay changes now, and we're going to go through how these kind of tweak the gameplay for our AO and why these changes were made. So stamina pool, this is mainly because you're going to be doing a lot of moving. And because of the nature of the game mode, where it's a large open circle, you don't really know at what point contact is going to hit you. And you always feel like you're relevant and in the zone. So you're going to end up having a much slower pacing, depending on how you play, right? If you go meat grinder, you're going to get meat grinder. But depending on how you play, the pacing of the game is much slower. Which means that you're going to need to be able to traverse these large open areas a lot faster. So we've tweaked stamina to kind of help with that. but I would still encourage you guys to communicate with your IFV or APC or even Transpo Helo pilots and use vehicles to traverse the map rather than just trying to walk off the FOB. I will highly recommend against that. Just remember, this game mode plays different from vanilla squad. You don't have to just run off the FOB towards the enemy. You can respawn at main, you can get a transport helo, you can flank out and push with a vehicle off to the other side. You have to communicate with your APCs and IFVs to move you to certain locations. You can air assault in behind the enemy. And remember, you can still play outside this circle for a limited period of time. There's 500 tickets on either side. So even if you bleed a couple tickets on the outside of the circle because you're maneuvering around to flank, it can be worth it to do that, to come around a different flank and get the superior position to take an enemy FOB or eliminate an enemy squad, so on and so forth. CF health is increased by 10%. This is just a small thematic slash asymmetrical balance that we want to do. And then no more falling damage bleed because that was very annoying. Medic changes. One thing we wanted to do was put extra emphasis on the squad sticking together and helping each other up. One of the problems that I see in vanilla squad is the way that picking people up is done. Where only medic pickups and only getting picked up when there is a medic around is the only viable way to get brought up. If you're brought up in any other fashion, like a rifleman revives you but there's no medic nearby, I prefer to just die because you're bringing up with 1% health, you have no stamina, your sway is crazy, it takes too long. You just were not seeing enough buddy team revives, and the squad, because of that, would spread out because there's no real reason for me to wait for my rifleman to pick me up if the medic's not there, because I'm just going to be walking around until I get one tap by a pistol round or something at like 300 feet, and then now I'm down again and dead. So the whole mentality behind changing these revive changes, which I do know sound a little arcadey, but once again, we're not looking for realistic gameplay in this mod. I don't think anywhere in here do I ever say realistic. The focus of the mod is to make things thematic, but make them dynamic, okay? We're not going for a realistic mod. That is by no means what this gameplay is trying to achieve. But basically, anytime you get picked up, it's been reduced drastically now. Medics are in 4 seconds, pretty fast. Non-medic revives down to 8 seconds, which is much faster than, I think it's at 16 right now in vanilla or something ridiculous. And all players revive at 35% minimum health, which is just enough health for you to see clearly, as well as get stamina back, okay? So now, non-medic revives are almost as good as medic revives, but you still need the medic for faster revives, as well as to get health back from the medic bag. And medics heal 2 times faster because we've cut the amount of medics down from 2 to 1. Because you don't need that many medics when normal revives are almost just as effective, okay? Dead is implemented, which is the kind of the converse of the balancing in the other direction that we've done. So anything that is like, you should die from this, which is 50 cal, IED strikes, airstrikes, artillery, and tank rounds, you are intended, it's a little buggy right now, but you're intended to go straight to the dead screen, okay? And with these changes, what you see is a couple of cool things. Number one is squads stick together and pick each other up more often. You really see people dragging and suppressing and trying to get your friends back up because almost anyone can do it. So everyone is involved in the revival process. And it feels really good. It feels really cinematic and thematic when you're out there on the streets, like pulling people off the roads and stuff. It feels great rather than like, oh, you know, the medic's not here or a medic can't get you, just give up and revive. So that's one of the changes we've done. And this small change here really changes how the gameplay within squad works. The first thing is that your saturation is decreased while receiving incoming fire. So it feels a little bit more intense. But in addition to that, every incoming round in proximity to your character will cause your point of aim to flinch. Which means that if one person is shooting a couple rounds at you, you can still fight it and get back on your point of aim. But if you are truly being suppressed by ARs, multiple rifles, or even HMGs, you will essentially be, it will be impossible to return effective fire. And the reason why this change is so important is because in vanilla squad, there is no suppression. I know people say you can quote unquote suppress in squad, but I think that the mechanic is it just doesn't do what it's intended to do. You get a whole bunch of sway, but it does nothing to stop effective fire being returned. Now, because of these suppression changes, when you get shot at, you have 2 options really. A is to immediate move for cover, or B, return fire, gain fire superiority, and maneuver on the enemy, or fight and kill that enemy. Whereas originally in vanilla, in firefights, what you would see happen is, oh, you're shooting at me, I'm just gonna 180, look at your face, and tap it. Because I can. Because the suppression doesn't do anything in squad. And you can go back and watch all my squad videos. You'll see me get shot at. I'll just 180, look at the guy, right click, scope in, left click, head tap. Because I'm a better shooter, and suppression doesn't do anything in squad. But now you actually see fire team tactics being utilized, where SBF or support by fire positions are being placed, ARs are set up, and you're able to actually maneuver with that kind of tactic. You know, being able to fix and flank or suppress and push. These are new things to squad. All right, we've added a couple vehicles. These kind of speak to themselves. VBIDs, there's 3 kinds. You have a fast one, a large one, and then an armored one. TOW and ATGMs have been removed to the game just because I think they're terrible for gameplay, like the emplacements, because you can hide them in a bush and essentially can't, counter all the enemy vehicles in a valley or the area, because it's impossible to spot because vehicles don't have thermals, and these things will just one-shot your vehicle out of nowhere. So these have been removed. We've kept them on our Bradleys and our BMPs, right? Because those are very large, moving vehicles with, smokestacks coming from them or dirt kick up as they move. And you cannot hide them as easily as emplacements. 2-minute respawn on all vehicles. This is taken heavily influenced by Hell Let Loose. And this does a lot to change how the game mode plays. The reason why 2-minute respawns on all vehicles is important is because it does a couple things. And I know a lot of you at the beginning, upon hearing this, are freaking out because you're saying, oh, that's way too low. There's no penalty for losing the vehicle. If we look at a map like Kohat, okay? If we look at a map like Kohat, the drive into the AO alone with the mountains probably takes anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes depending on the skill of your driver. This drive in is what we consider the respawn time for your vehicle. Same for Yeeho, same for Goro, same for any of these large maps. The distance from the circle to your spawn is long. So upon getting popped within the circle, you wait at main for 2 minutes, your vehicle comes back, and then 2 minutes plus whatever drive-in or transpo time you have counts as your respawn time. And I think that this is a better alternative, rather dying like in vanilla and sitting at main base for 5-15 minutes AFK in your phone watching TikToks until the vehicle comes back, and then driving an additional 5 or 10 minutes into the AO. So we've drastically reduced the vehicle respawn times. What this also does is it creates armor v armor mentality. And how this works essentially is because let's say we give you four BMPs, and there's a layer that we have on Narva that has 4 BMPs versus 4 Bradleys, okay? And these are on 2-minute respawn timers. Now you might be thinking, oh dear God, this is a lot of armor coming back really soon. Narva is an extremely dense city map. So one thing we've done is we've ensured that all heavy armor or IFVs are only done on really urban terrain. Nowhere where like they can dominate the map. Because Windows, they're the worst freaking counter. Or they're the best counter for armored vehicles. Because there's so many windows, so many places for AT to hide. The BMPs and Bradleys are already kind of negated by the fact that it is a city. The second thing that we've done here with vehicle balance is now, when these vehicles come in here and they fight each other, right? Armor is looking for armor on the map, okay? So armor is always looking for armor, because as soon as this vehicle gets scrapped and sent back to main, this armor piece is coming back into the map, and armor is always focused on trying to eliminate the other armor. Just because, like, there's no time, like in vanilla, where if you eliminate the other team's armor, you get like 30 minutes of completely free time to shit on the enemy infantry. That doesn't happen in our mod. There's no time where armor completely dominates the infantry for an extended period of time. You might maybe get 5 minutes of armor time where you can push up and actually get a little ground before this armor comes back in. But what this essentially does is it creates an armor v armor mentality, because that enemy armor is coming up fast again. You're always looking out for them. You're not focused on absolutely shredding the infantry and causing a massive unbalance within the team dynamic. The third reason why this is done is because in vanilla squad, if I play as a 3-man Bradley crew and my vehicle gets popped, I'm now waiting for 10 minutes and I have to drive back in for an extra 20 minutes, okay? A lot of players don't have the patience that once I lose my armor crew, I'm going to sit at main for 20 minutes and then drive in for another. I'm probably exaggerating here, but I'd say it's roughly about 25 minutes on average. Then armor crew gets back into the fight. Very few people have that kind of patience to just sit and wait, etc. So what these players are either doing is either A, they're sitting at main just on their phones, or B, they then disband their squad, create a 3-man squad, and are infantry running around, dicking around for 30 minutes. Which is not exactly what we want to have happen. By making this kind of loop for armor, gameplay loop for armor, where they're always in and they're always fighting and they're always playing and they're always shooting other armor, these guys who pick armor squads are able to continually pick armor squads and play armor the entire game. Rather than, oh, I'm going to play armor for 30 minutes until I get popped and then disconnect from the match, or sit at main for 20 minutes on my phone, or just dick around as infantry walking around with my crewman kit for 30 minutes until the vehicle comes back. Because I think that gameplay loop doesn't allow for dedicated armor squads, which is something that we want to see within the mod. The other thing that we've done to balance this is, I know this is a lot of vehicles, but we've also buffed lat and hat. Lat and hat at the infantry level is more lethal to these vehicles. It disarms them and disables them more easily, and it allows for one-shots if put in the proper position. Both teams also have lats reduced, so there is a rebalancing there as well. But yeah, as you can see, everything's kind of interconnected at this point. All right, we're going to continue here. Map marker changes. This is a huge one. The quick and dirty of this is you can only see your own squad, okay? You can see your own squad and other squad leaders. And what this has done through extensive testing, and you can actually see it happen in-game, is what this has actually done is created an environment where your squad mates will stick together because they cannot read the map to lone wolf and metagame and flank out to where they think the enemy is because they don't have that information. Your squad is now focused on where your squad is. So squads are much more tight-knit. You're able to control them more easily as an SL, and we've removed the clutter or the over-information on your map. So that's it's simplified at that sense. And that has a lot of changes at the gameplay level. Commander. Okay, so Commander does a couple things. We wanted Commander to have more options to command the battle and lead the battle like an actual commander, platoon leader. And we've done that by giving them the information tools necessary. So their UAVs, if you're conventional, are on a 2-minute cooldown with a 10-minute duration. So you should almost always be able to pull up your UAV and get a picture of what's going on and be able to lead your team. And the same for IRF and their drone, okay? Additionally, we wanted to give commanders the tools to affect the battle constantly, but at a less lethal and devastating rate than vanilla. So if you guys know how artillery functions in vanilla squad, it's pretty much a FOB delete button every 30 minutes. And it is way overkill. It is way overkill how artillery is done in the vanilla game because it's literally I'm going to delete everything here every 30 or 45 minutes. Where now artillery is on a 10-minute cooldown, but there's only 8 rounds going out. So you should be in constant communication with your squad leaders on the map, coordinating these smaller, more consistent strikes to gain territory on the map. I know that when you hop into this server, it seems mindless, it seems like there's no objective. That is because this game mode requires complex and dynamic thinking on the battlefield to organize and move with your team. If you log on and you go brain dead, you're going to experience a meat grinder and not know what's going on. And this is going to take time. It will be hard for the entire player base to learn how to play this. But I believe there's a space within tactical shooters that allows for this kind of gameplay and truly open up a PvP milsim-esque sandbox for you guys to play. But that kind of mentality behind the command markers or the command assets rings true for all the assets that we've added or tweaked. So now that we've gone over all the changes, and I hope you have a better idea of how this plays, I'm going to give you guys just a couple of quick and dirty tips on how to actually play this game mode, okay? So the first matchup we're going to look at is conventional versus irregular, okay? And how this is intended, or at least in its infancy, what the meta looks like, okay? Against irregular forces, the strat for conventional is to take the entire platoon to a designated FOB, safe FOB location, and preferably as closer to the center as possible. But if no center safe portion exists, then, you know, you're going to have to push it closer to the edge. But whatever safe area you can get your fob down, the entire platoon needs to be focused on reaching this area. And the reason why you want the entire platoon to be focused on this area is because insurgents are going to be spread out along an entire line. If you know anything about defense in depth, you know why, spear pointing through a single point is more effective than trying to spread out. Because the mentality or strategy here, right, is the fact that insurgents are spread out all along this line, trying to prevent conventional from getting in because they start early, right? These guys start early. Because we are a single force, we are able to pierce through a single area with a certain amount of defenders more easily than if we were to spread out and get online and disperse ourselves like so, right? And just every squad lead goes in a different direction. Because now you're fighting on one-to-one fights in multiple directions, rather than taking an overwhelming force and crushing through a certain breakpoint in the defense, okay? So as you can see, like, the gameplay in this mod gets more complex the more you know and the more you think about it, okay? And that's what we want to open up, is rather than just mindless invasion in AAS, get in the circle, stay on the circle, we wanted to truly give you guys a PvP milsim sandbox. So the meta and how this matchup works is we have insurgents on one side setting up their line, and conventional is going to break through and pick one location, because you want to take your overwhelming numbers and force to guarantee a fob location going up. And this can go up anywhere in the circle you deem safe as a platoon, okay? Once you have the fob established, you want to make sure that fob is in a safe location, because in this matchup, the second you get the fob down, you're going to get swarmed by insurgents. That is just naturally the early game of how this gameplay works. So you need to hold the defense and build up the fob. Eventually, you will get to the point where you are holding the defense of the fob. The second that this happens, you will need to be looking for the 4 enemy fobs that are surrounding the AO to stop them from bleeding you 40 tickets per 15 minutes. That's the mid game, okay? That's kind of the mid game of it. Now, during this mid game, it is important, this rings true even for conventional versus conventional, that you do not just walk off the fob, okay? Because if we're thinking about how this looks, if we have, full view of the battlefield, insurgents will have you fully encircled on the fob. If you try to walk out of the fob, you are most likely going to get clapped, and this is where the common meat grinder scenario happens, is trying to just walk off the fob. Don't do that. We give you the tools to operate in this entire AO with all the vehicles you have at your disposal. So maybe that means respawning at main and using a helicopter to air assault over here and break out from this circle without having to push through the meat grinder, right? Or maybe that means loading up into an IFV and driving into the point. Or maybe that even means asking your IFV squads or airborne helicopter squads to swing by the fob in their armored vehicles, their APCs, IFVs, or helicopters, and to transport you out of the encirclement, okay? Alternatively, yes, you can do the meat grinder. You can use Commander RD assets and try to break out with overwhelming force. That is still a viable option, okay? But remember, you have other tools available at your disposal. This game mode's really going to force you to think, how can we get out of this? What can we use to change the situation? But if you turn your brain off, you will encounter a meat grinder. Do not turn your brain off. Communicate with your teammates. Look at the problem and think, how do we fix this? There are so many things that can happen in this game mode. You could end up trying to set down a second fob once you've taken more territory and extend your defensive bubble. You could attempt to set up another fob over here outside of the encirclement, establish it, and then remove this fob and switch up the flow of the gameplay that way. There is a large amount of options because of the way this game mode is designed for you to do almost anything your team wants to do. If you want to turtle, you could try to get 2 fobs up pretty close in the circle for 30 tickets per 15 minutes and try to outkill the enemy so long as you have one of their fobs down. You could go extremely aggressive and just try to hunt fobs the entire time. There's a lot of play that happens within this. And all the while that your infantry squads are doing these things, you have logis that are trying to continually get ammo and build to this fob. They're constantly being ambushed by insurgents, which ends up, the counterplay to that means that these guys are being convoyed with MRAPs. These supply convoys are actually a thing, and you're actually having ambushes on real supply convoys, which you can see in plenty of our Fallujah maps where we'll do that. But there's a ton of different options. It's a sandbox, guys. You got to think on how you want to play it. But the important thing is you do it with your team. If you think all individually as squads, you're going to have a bad time. All right, let's talk about conventional versus conventional and the basic do's and do nots. You guys are going to start at the same time. You guys are going to establish your FOBs in safe locations. Typically, we see it happen on the split end of the map. But, you know, we've had it happen in the inverse, where if this is team 1 and this is team 2, sometimes we've seen team 1 set up on this side and team 2 set up on this side, and that creates a really interesting dynamic. Or sometimes they'll be real close to each other, and that also increases or changes the dynamic. You're able to place 2 FOBs. It doesn't mean that you should. If you ever place a second FOB, it should always be mutually supported by the other FOB, okay? If you ever create a separate FOB on the opposite side of the map and you keep both up, what you've essentially done, and this is the enemy's FOB, is you have 2 isolated locations to defend, and the enemy just needs to take 1, okay? In order for you to lose 75 tickets. But if you turtle and you go the double defense route, you can. Like, you can see there's a ton of things that you can do, a ton of different strategies that you could employ. It's really going to come down to how your team wants to play. But communicate, come up with a plan as a team, and try to think differently than vanilla squad. It is not a meat grinder unless you make it one, okay? The one last thing we're going to touch on before we tune out of this extremely long, drawn-out video is how irregular forces should fight, because we kind of skipped over that. So let's assume we have conventional here and irregular here. If I'm in a regular force, what is my strategy? Initially, I'm going to get out on the map and get my 4 FOBs down as soon as possible, okay? Because I want to start that -40 bleed as soon as possible. I'm also going to try to get online and interrupt or find where they're putting out the FOB and ambush any convoys coming into the city. I definitely 100% want to be ambushing supply convoys throughout the entirety of the map. So let's say that this is the conventional FOB. I want to be cutting off supplies at all points in time whenever possible, because it will make me attacking this FOB easier. Now, let's say that, all right, we're ending up getting meat grindy here, and we've stalemated where we cannot break through their defense, and they're not using their brains to get off their FOB by air assaulting from different angles or, you know, taking vehicles and inserting somewhere else. They're continuing to walk off the FOB. Well, guess what? Like I said, it's only a meat grinder if you make it one. We can now go on the defensive as insurgents, depending on if we've done the math properly, right? What I mean by that is, if we have 1, 2, 3, 4 FOBs down, just ignore this, that's -40, and they're getting +5. We are out draining them. There is no need for me to meat grind into this. We can now play interestingly. We can go defensively and now set up ambushes as they try to come out, okay? So we can stop meat grinding. We don't have to necessarily go for this FOB if this is the situation. If we have all 4 FOBs up and they have their +5, I already know if we stop fighting and everyone stops shooting, we will win this match. Which means that CF needs to come out. So instead of meat grinding and getting farmed on the attack here, we can just hold the line. We can set up sniper positions, ambushes in alleys. We can continue hitting their FOBs, and we can draw them out. And once we draw them out of their FOB, because they're no longer on their location, we can then send counterattacks back in on flanks, because we've drawn them out of the FOB. So you need to think. You need to think. It's going to be a meat grinder if you make it one. But if you think about how the game mode works, now that you have all this information, you can see there's, I don't want to say an infinite, it feels an infinite amount of strategies, because that feels like kind of weird to say. But there's a lot. There's a lot of different tactics you can employ. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think of the mod in the comments down below. Let me know your feedback in the comments down below as well. Leave a thumbs up on the mod if you like it. Join the Discord for any feedback and bug reports. But I hope this video was enlightening, and I hope this kind of gives you a better perspective on why these changes were made and how the game mode is going to be played. We are only just getting started. There's a lot we need to do. There's a public Trello you can see if you want to see what we're working on. But this is the first, essentially, real stage of us getting occupation out. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time, guys, take it easy, and peace out.